Hey, creeps. I'm Shane.
I'm Hannah.
Way to go. Delayed response on that
I
one.
was drinking my tea.
This is a surprise mini-sode.
Surprise.
We got a new piece of tech. The mixer thing that we mentioned. And so now we got new tech and we got new sound effects.
Yay!
Isn't that cool? That's really the sound effects pay for themselves, honestly. But,
oh yeah, well worth them.
You have any personal creeps to start with today for our mini-sode?
Shout out again to Tyler. I think he's going to get a shout out every episode because without him, we would not have been able to get this thing.
Yeah, for real. Go ahead.
I do have a shout out for my grandma. We call her Mama. She listened to the last episode I did about the Greenbrier ghost, and she wanted to let me know that she's been to Zona Heaster's grave.
Ooh.
Yeah, so she probably knew more about this topic than I did before I started that story. Yeah. So shout out to my mama. She's been there.
Shout out Mama. Yep.
She loves spooky stuff.
Does she?
She does. Yeah. She likes to scare us.
Oh no.
She's so cute.
Well, luckily we have more ghost stories coming up in the future. So
yeah, she'll love it. Thank you for listening, Mama.
Yep. Monster catfish is what we're covering today, which is actually, I guess, our first cryptid. You could consider it that.
Yeah.
Because what's a cryptid? Like a Bigfoot, like an animal that might exist, or it could be like a creature, like a skinwalker, or it could be
like a Mothman,
like a gnome, a mythical creature, or it could be like a kraken, or
let's look up the definition of cryptid.
Yeah. Anyway, we're doing monster catfish, and this came about because of when I first started kayaking. I told my sister, I was like, I'll probably go to like Bluestone Lake and stuff. It's semi nearby. And she was like, do you know that there's huge catfish at Bluestone Lake? And I was like, well, yeah, like catfish get pretty big. And she said, no, like the size of like Volkswagens. And I was like, huh? And so
this might not be a cryptid exactly, because Merriam-Webster says the meaning of cryptid is an animal that has been claimed to exist but never proven to exist. And we have seen like huge catfish. So maybe not a textbook definition of cryptid, but something still kind of weird.
I'll tell you this. This is considered the South's Lochness monster. Is how it's described. Yeah. So, and we'll get into why. But like I said, my sister said, there's these huge catfish at the bottom of Bluestone Dam. And I was like, what are you talking about? And she said, that's what we heard all the time growing up. She was like, people would say there's these huge catfish at the bottom of Bluestone Dam, and that nobody could catch them, and they're huge, and divers see them and stuff. And I was like, that's not true at all. And so I looked it up, and there's like a Snopes article. Anyway, we're going to get into it and the history of why there's these stories of monster catfish.
I've definitely heard these stories a lot before. Like I hadn't heard about them at Bluestone, but I've heard about them being in Summersville Lake near the dam up there.
Yeah.
My cousin was scuba diving one time and was down there, near the dam, and said she went to push what she thought was a log out of her way under the water. And then when she pushed it, it like blinked at her and she realized it was a really big catfish.
Yeah.
Not necessarily as big as like a Volkswagen, like you said, but big enough that she mistook it for a tree that had fallen into the water. So,
and they do get big. There's breeds of catfish that do get big, certain species that get huge. And we'll get into all that. The funny thing about Summersville is there's the story you've probably heard. I mean, being from West Virginia, everybody says this as like a joke that the town of Summersville used to be called Gad.
No, it's not a joke. That's real.
I know that, but the joke that everybody says is they changed the name after they built the dam because it would be Gad Dam.
Yeah.
So
that's the Summersville Dam.
But so I don't know when they changed the name. I just know that that's the funny. And it probably is that, honestly.
Yeah, that probably was the real reason.
But anyway, let's get into the thing. So I'm pulling some of this information, obviously, from Snopes. Like I said, they did like the myth-busting article on the catfish. And then there's some fish and game magazines that run web publications that have mentioned some of this. So, basically the story goes that anytime somebody hears this is the largest catfish have never been caught. Like, not even close to what the largest catfish is. The real giants, the ones that grow as big as Volkswagen Beetles and as big as trucks, can swallow a Jack Russell whole and even pull under a child. And they live at the bottom of reservoirs and dams, far too deep and far too wise for any fisherman to ever hook into one.
Spooky.
You can try to land one, sure. You can go ahead. You're wasting your time. Every now and then, however, a diver is tasked with going down there for, to fix some equipment or check for cracks in a dam, or just a recreational diver, and they catch sight of one of these huge beasts just lurking at the bottom of this deep, dark dam or this dark reservoir, and then the diver has to promptly surface before they become fish food.
They get swallowed up.
This is Country Roads Creeps. That was a long intro.
Yeah, I thought we were in the story, actually.
No, this is...
I was not prepared to do the intro with you. That wasn't our best one.
So anyway, like I said, a lot of this information comes from like Snopes and some of the like fish and game magazines and stuff. So from it's a publication online called Garden and Gun, and they say that basically that intro, that's what a bunch of Southerners have long believed, that there's these huge catfish at the bottom of dams or the bottom of reservoirs. And all the kids with a fishing pole have all heard this story. Anyone south has heard this story. That there's these huge uncatchable fish, and they're too smart for you to hook into them, and they're obviously too deep for you to drop a line down there. But it's basically the closest thing that the South has to the Loch Ness Monster. And I think there have been some stories of like some larger lakes that have had like their own Loch Ness of sorts, but this has been spread like literally every town that has a dammed up lake has this story of a huge catfish that lives at the bottom of it. So basically Snopes kind of compiled a bunch of stories from some of these tales of the catfish, like the divers that were cleaning out intake to a power plant, and they had to be rescued from the depths by EMS crew, and they were found floating unconscious, one of which was in a coma for several days, and they reported a catfish so large, one of the divers was sucked into the giant mouth only to be spat out. And so that was
Jonah and the whale.
Yeah.
Wait, the catfish knocked them all unconscious?
From fright, I think.
Oh.
Yeah.
From everlasting faint.
So that was from like 1998. Here's one from 2000. Somebody says there's a lake where I live that's dammed up, and the dam repairman goes down to fix or check for cracks in the dam, and he sees a huge catfish that could swallow a Volkswagen Bug whole, and he comes up from the depths of the lake and he quits his job on the spot. So there's stories like that are out there. And there's all these variations of it. They all have these different like mythical catfish stories. They're in quarries in Georgia, lakes in Texas, the Colorado River, and less specific sightings naming only a certain state. The legend moves around so much, and it's been told for decades as like this occurrence that only happened like at these local places with lakes or like really big rivers, or and pretty much in the South. I don't know of any stories that happen like up north, even though there are catfish that are up north in the northern part of the United States.
They don't have the biggins.
No, they don't. So, in some of the rarer tellings, the fish will be described as a carp or a pike. Mm-hmm. Carp isn't so scary, but pike actually have like sharp teeth. So,
have you ever like been down at the beach and you walk out on the boardwalks and they have where you can get food for the carp out of like a bubblegum machine? Put in a quarter and
Yeah.
you get the fish food. Okay, they are a little scary when there's like 70 of them on top of each other trying to get the food.
Yeah, and carp are
little
actually
bit
an invasive species.
Yeah, they're kind of gross.
And I'll get into that at the end. But anyway,
Pike can get, pretty big.
they can, yeah.
Yeah. Sure. That's scary.
But so some of the narratives commonly include these people saying like, "I'll never go back down to the bottom of the lake," or they'll have some kind of like really vivid description, like as big as a truck or as big as a Volkswagen Bug. They're big enough to swallow a man or several men at once. Sometimes the catfish does more than just look at a diver. He chomps on a leg or something. Alternatively, there's been accounts of they don't necessarily touch a diver or anything, but out of fright, the diver's hair turns white and
What?
never a diver again. So
Okay, I don't know about all that.
like I said, there's all these mythical kind of stories that,
Yeah.
and Snopes kind of has them all listed. Like, here's variations of this whole tale. So, so out of Garden and Gun again, they got in contact with a guy named Billy Mitchell, and he's a diver with River Services Company in Greenville, Mississippi. He's spent the last 15 years salvaging submerged barges, working on dams and waterway construction sites from the Gulf of Mexico all the way up to St. Paul, Minnesota. So he's all around, and he's heard every legend that there is. So he said, actually, when people see them with their diving shirts on, they always ask, like, "Hey, have you seen one of these big catfish?" And he's like, "Yeah, I hear this question like 30 times a year." It's like once a week somebody's going to ask him, "Hey, have you seen this catfish that's as big as a truck?" So, and he always says, like, he always tells them, like, yeah, it's a myth. But then sometimes he says he'll get like a little bit of like an attitude and be like, "Oh, yeah, they're real. Like, you better watch out." So, which kind of, I guess, keeps the myth going a little bit, because all the people that know that it's like a myth are, they just, it's a story to tell kids and stuff.
Yeah.
So,
like the boogeyman.
Yeah.
Watch out for the big catfish in the lake.
Yeah, for real.
Swallow you up.
So, he said all the stuff that he's witnessed aren't really necessarily anything special. Like, there are some big catfish, nothing that's necessarily exclusive to like one lake or one area, and nothing that's like big enough to swallow a manhole or big enough to, as big as a truck or a Volkswagen Bug or something. There is actually an old story from Japan. So from about the 15 or 1600s up to the late 1800s, the Japanese believed in an orca-sized mythical whiskered fish named Namazu, who controlled flooding and rainfall. And in 1855, when a 7.0 magnitude earthquake rocked the city that would later become Tokyo, which killed 8,000 people, locals believe that Namazu was the reason that all of this destruction came about.
I hadn't heard that before.
Yeah, I haven't either. So, but these huge stories are all over the place. Even Mark Twain in 1883, in his memoir Life on the Mississippi, he writes of seeing a 6-foot, 250-pound catfish in the river. This is the Mississippi River. And if that's true, it would dwarf the current standing North American record of a 143-pound blue catfish caught in Kerr Lake on the Virginia-North Carolina border in 2011. So, like I said, they do get big. In North America, the largest is 143 pounds. So,
like, for a fish, pretty big.
Yeah.
Just not as big
bigger than
as
you,
a truck.
right?
Yeah, bigger than me.
So,
not big enough to like swallow a grown person whole.
No, but we'll also get into that here in a minute. So, a lot of these rumors of the giant catfish got a lot more colorful over time. There's actually a story from the early 1900s. It's like 1902, where it's publishing in Kentucky, the Hickman Courier. They published a front page story about a farmer's near-death fight with a monster catfish that had become stuck in the shallows of a creek. And Nobody knows why, but he decided that he was going to jump on top of the catfish, and it impelled him with one of its spiked fins and pulled him deeper into the water where he nearly drowned. So
That's sad.
that's kind of like I think this Courier, the Hickman Courier, is kind of like a tabloid of sorts, but
Right.
who knows? At this point, like, once you go back a certain amount in time, you never really know what stories are entirely true,
Yeah.
and which stories are entirely false. So,
Like when I was talking about the Greenbrier ghost.
yeah.
Kind of all over the place.
Yep. So, there was a widely passed around photo of a catfish in the neighborhood of 800 pounds that was taken in 1914 in Hardin County, Tennessee, that further propagated this belief in these huge catfish. And actually, Snopes was one of the places that proved this to be fake. But there's a ESPN article that I found, and I'll pull the picture and put it on our Instagram in the photo dump for this that will show what it was. And you can kind of see, it looks kind of obvious after I tell you this, but basically it was somewhat of a prank. They used a child's wagon and put a normal size catfish in there. It was like 50 to 85 pounds from what I've seen.
Yeah.
Which is still a big catfish, but
right.
not 600-pound catfish or 800-pound catfish. And so they put it in a child's wagon.
Cool illusion sort of thing.
Yeah. And they used a cardboard cutout of a man from a cigarette ad. So
that's kind of funny.
Yeah. So they took this photo, and it actually hung up in the general store that was nearby for a long time. And it became like a sort of like this fishing attraction that, like, hey, we caught out here, we caught an 800-pound. Look at that picture. That's it in a wagon, a normal sized,
that's funny.
Human sized wagon. And that's a real guy.
Normal human sized man.
So, and I think that it hung up in that store, I think, and I'm not sure if that store is still around, but for a long time it hung around.
You know what that reminds me of?
What?
One time when I was a kid, we were at the state fair, my whole family, and there was this attraction where it said, like, to see the world's smallest horse, the tiniest horse ever. And I begged my dad to, like, pay to let me see the littlest horse. And he was trying to explain to me so hard that it was a scam, that it wasn't really like a tiny horse. It was just, one of those things to make money. And I could not be convinced. And finally I wore him down. He was like, fine, like, here's the $5, whatever. And so I go around the curtain that they have, and it was just a miniature pony that they had down in a hole in the ground to make it look smaller than it really was. They'd, like, dug out a little rectangular, like, pit almost, and put this miniature pony down in the hole. And we're like, yep, that's it. World's smallest horse. And I learned a valuable lesson that day.
Yeah, that's really funny.
Everything at the fair is a scam.
As it turns out, the bearded lady is actually a real thing. So.
Oh.
Anyway, so I'll give you, like, the history of these stories on truck-sized catfish, right?
Okay.
So, according to Snopes, the earliest accounting of this kind of story was from the 50s. And there was basically a car that drove off a bridge into the water, and divers had to go down to rescue it. So they go down, and a shadow creeps over them, and it's this gigantic catfish. And
spooky.
So, they all came up and they had this account of this catfish. So, they look up in horror, and it's the size of a Volkswagen, and then they make it back to the surface, and that's hundreds of feet above them. And the driver and the passengers still rest at the bottom of the lake because they won't go back. Nobody will go back down. So that's from the 50s. By the 60s, these mythical catfish had grown to the size of Ford Falcons. I didn't look that up to see what it was. I'm imagining, like, one of those huge, like, bus-sized sedans that they made in the 60s.
I have no idea.
In the 70s, the same fish were as large as full-size Buicks. And then by the next decade, they were the size of Winnebagos. So they keep getting bigger. And they actually make a joke here that if the current trend in storytelling continues unchecked, by 2100, those cats will rival space shuttles. So. Anyway, so all of these stories of monster catfish, they surface over small town newspapers every so often. But in the 30s, they kind of took on like a new life where Tennessee Valley Authority began building hydroelectric dams throughout the Southeast. And they were deepening the waterways and making existence of the gigantic fish more plausible in the minds of a lot of people. And so if you don't know about catfish, they're negative buoyant. They like to sit at the bottom of like lakes and rivers and all these reservoirs and at the bottom of the dams and stuff, which is, you can't see them because they sit down on the bottom of the floor of the river or the lake or whatever. And you're never going to hook them because they're way too big and smart for you. So anyway, so they were featured in all these far-fetched stories. The rumor in the 70s persisted in Caseyville, Kentucky, that a fisherman found a human baby in the stomach of a large flathead catfish.
What?
And that's according to the American Folklore an encyclopedia. Within a decade, that supposed incident, within a decade of that supposed incident, giant catfish had become a bona fide tabloid fodder. So they're featured every tabloid magazine, and hey, these catfish are swallowing babies and dogs and people and everything.
Was there any more information about that story? Like, if that was true?
Not really, and I highly doubt that it was true.
Yeah.
If it was.
Horrible.
Okay. If it was, it's not that a catfish would attack a baby, because they don't really do that. There's not really any reported, stories of someone actually being attacked by a catfish, other than these like myths and stuff of giant catfish.
Right.
There are catfish big enough to swallow a baby. But if that was true, I would imagine that it would have to be a baby drowned,
right?
Landed at the bottom, and one of the catfish came by and scooped it up, because they're not really.
It didn't like come up to the surface and grab a baby.
Yeah, they are, a lot of species are bottom feeders.
Yeah.
And a lot of species will, once they get big enough, they will become predatory, but mostly on other fish and like crawdads and things like that, shellfish. And then something that's dead, that's at the bottom of a river or something like that, they will eat. So they go into some of the certain tales of catfish. One of the largest species of the whale's catfish that can grow as large as 300 pounds, but they are native to Eastern Europe and some of Asia. Now, these stories, like I said, there's all of the divers that are mentioned in any of these articles that I read. Basically, they're like, yeah, I've never seen anything like that, but we get asked all the time, and so sometimes we just tell people, yeah, it's true, there's gigantic catfish. So let's go into some of the facts that I found out, because this whole thing, despite like me hearing the story, like my sister grew up hearing these stories apparently.
Yeah.
And I heard it and I read some of these, and everyone says it's mythical, but it's like, okay, well, I know that there's some catfish that can grow huge. So how big do they get?
Right.
And if they're going to get that big, where are they? And so I guess we'll find out. So here's facts about catfish.
Okay.
There are about 40 families of catfish. There's about 30 families in North America alone. And catfish can be found on every continent except for Antarctica. There's no Antarctic catfish.
That we know of.
Unless I guess they dig deep enough and they just find like catfish skeletons from like 1 million years ago when Antarctica was a rainforest or something. But anyway, these, like I said, 40 families. There's 30 of these families in the United States alone. There's over 3,000 species of catfish worldwide. And that's actually like a really big number if you think about it. This article that I read, all these facts on catfish, says that it's 1 out of every 20 known vertebrates is a catfish.
Wow.
So that's a pretty high ratio.
Yeah.
Like when people on Twitter talk about getting ratioed, get ratioed by a catfish.
Catfish, yeah.
Like 1 out of 20 known vertebrates is a catfish. So
How can that be?
I don't know. I was trying to think about that.
That's a
and I
lot.
decided not to think too much about it and just say it like it was a real fact that these people know about and no one else does. But
okay, we'll accept it.
I'm believing it. So there's scientists believe that there are more to be discovered. I wonder if it's actually aquatic vertebrates. Maybe that makes more sense.
Yeah, I could believe that a little easier.
Anyway, so there's 3,000 species, and there's a bunch of species in North America and in all over Europe, Asia, South America. They're all over the place, but there's 3,000 species known worldwide. Scientists think that there could be more that we don't know about yet. So just a little bit about catfish in general. Most of them are bottom feeders, and they're all pretty much similarly shaped, despite all the size differences that you can find. They're mostly active at night, and once adults, they'll eat other fish and other vertebrates. One of the unique characteristics of catfish is that their skin is smooth without scales, and instead, catfish have sharp spines on their fins and their backs and sides. So there's a lot of fish that have spines like on their fins, so like bluegill and stuff. When you catch them, you have to like sweep back, or they'll get you. You kind of have to be careful handling them. Right. It's not really going to like kill you, but it hurts to get stabbed by a fish. So anyway, so as their namesake, the most notable feature on a catfish is their whiskers, also known as barbels. And most of them have at least one pair of these whiskers, but they can have up to 8 barbels near their mouth.
Oh,
so
that's
like
too many.
4 pairs.
Too many.
Yeah.
Yuck.
So they can range actually in size from 4 to 5 centimeters and all the way up to 15 feet or 4.6 meters in length.
That's huge.
It is huge. Yeah. All right. So the most commonly heard of catfish, at least around here, you're going to find the blue catfish, which, like I said earlier, the world record for that catfish, at least caught, is 143 pounds, and it was caught in Kerr Lake, Virginia. You've got the channel catfish, and the world record for that is 58 pounds, caught in Santee Cooper Reservoir in South Carolina. And the flathead, aka mud catfish, has a world record of 123 pounds in Elk City Reservoir, Kansas. So they do get big. So, like I said, the ones you're going to hear around here are like the blue catfish and the flathead, or the mud cat, and the channel catfish. So, and they're all in like lakes and rivers around West Virginia, the New River especially. So I'll give you a rundown of what the biggest catfish are. And I have ranked them myself. And so if you look at this list online, if you look this up, they're ranked differently. And I'm going to explain why I've ranked them differently. So in third place, you've got the Paraiba catfish. And that can grow up to nearly 12 feet in length and weigh over 400 pounds. The second one is going to be the Wells catfish. That's WELS, Wells catfish. And they can grow up to 15 feet in length and weigh anywhere from 300 to 660 pounds. Now, I'll say this. Like I said, the world record for Wells catfish is only like 290 something pounds. So they can get up to 300 pounds. That's the record. What? Well, so they have been caught at like 290 something.
Right.
This article that I read says up to 660, and I disagree that you could have a 600-pound catfish that hasn't been caught. Mm-hmm. If they can grow up to that, and where would you even find that information other than people fishing for them? So
Well, maybe I guess
Anyway.
like a diver could have seen it, but I don't know how they would know how heavy it is if it wasn't.
Yeah, like I said, you would
Brought
have to
up.
land it and
Yeah,
come weigh it,
Mhm.
which counts as fishing for catfish because people noodle for them, which means you go in the water and
Yeah.
grab them by the mouth and pull them out of the water,
You're not doing that if it's 600 pounds.
which is an insane way to fish.
Yeah, because
So
like, what about like snapping turtles and stuff? They live in the same
There's-
place. You're gonna lose a finger.
there's tons of people that have lost fingers noodling for catfish because
Simply not worth it to me.
yeah. So
Get it.
anyway, the number one catfish by me
According to Shane.
is the Mekong catfish. This is the largest recorded as far as I've seen. It doesn't grow as long as the Wales catfish. They grow approximately 10 feet long, but they can weigh 646 pounds. That's the largest that I've seen caught. So there it is.
Yeah, I agree with your ranking.
So not you're losing about 5 foot on length, but they're fat. They're thick little buddies.
They're chunky.
Thick. They're 2 C's, 3 C's maybe.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, 600 pounds, you're gaining 300 pounds on one that's, 4 or 5 feet longer. So
Yeah.
I think you deserve number one. Anyway, so what could all the stories be about? I know that these are people are wondering, what if it's not the catfish, then what could it be? So
Loch Ness monster.
yeah. So the Wales catfish is like the quote unquote biggest that everybody says. Wales is a Proto-Germanic word for whale. And it has not been introduced in North America yet. So it can't be that.
Right.
They don't live here. It is, however, in Brazil. And it's actually lives in a kind of an unusual habitat for the species. They exist in the Chernobyl exclusion zone.
Oh.
So, and people have studied them. They seem healthy there. Like there's not any problems with them. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Catfish are actually hardy for the creatures that they are. A lot of
Sturdy.
fish are actually a lot tougher than what people think they are.
Yeah.
When you consider that like bass, people fish for them, and you can really yoink a bass's face
Don't
off.
say that.
What?
Gross. And
Anyway.
sad.
The fish are tough, is what I'm trying to say. So there's a small population of Wales catfish in the abandoned cooling ponds and channels that are a close distance to the decommissioned power plant. Like I said, they appear healthy and they're maintaining a position as top predators in that ecosystem. So that's kind of cool. However, they are kind of invasive. So when they're introduced to a new area, the other fish species see a pretty steep decline because they're so big, they eat a lot, and where they're big, they can also be predatory to other fish. So they're not established in North America yet, including the Great Lakes. And they actually say that if they were introduced to the Great Lakes, they have a high confidence level that they would establish themselves and have a pretty good breeding population in the Great Lakes, at least. So the other one is the Mekong, the biggest fish. Number one catfish, according to me. The Mekong is not in West Virginia, clearly. Nor is it in the Mississippi River. Nor is it anywhere in North America. It's actually somewhat endangered a little bit. It's like protected. The way that they do
At risk.
Yeah. So the way that they do their the protected species stuff worldwide is kind of weird. Different areas, different regions, different countries have different ways of ranking versus like the endangered stuff. So the Mekong catfish, can you guess where that is found?
Nope.
Would you like to take a guess?
Nope.
They're found in the Mekong Basin. It's a big river. They actually had a battle there during like Vietnam War and stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So they've actually had quite a lot of battles there. Anyway, they're found naturally in the Mekong Basin from Vietnam all the way up to the Yunnan province of China.
China.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
That's what you loaded on the soundboard?
I got, yeah.
Get out.
Even got this.
I love China.
Boo.
Yeah. That's my favorite thing. My favorite thing is the compilations of all the times Trump has said China and how like it progressively gets more unhinged as it goes along.
Yeah. Okay. So you did tell me you had a surprise on the soundboard, and that's not what I expected.
Yep. And I can do the
China. China.
Yep.
Please don't.
Anyway, so if it's not those two, are there any species of fish in West Virginia that could be this myth about? Since we're talking about Bluestone or Somersville Dam or whatever.
Good question.
So what is there in West Virginia that could be that big?
West Virginia, boy.
Heck yeah. So.
Oh, this was a good use of money.
So we're going to go through some West Virginia records real quick.
Okay.
The common carp, the state record is 45.2 pounds. So not huge, not Volkswagen, big, huge. There's a grass carp. Those actually get pretty big, or a lot bigger than common carp. The state record is 71.69 pounds. The world record is actually 87 pounds and 10 ounces.
Okay, we're getting kind of big.
We're getting bigger. There's muskie, and they are actually pretty predatory. Although, despite what you'll read online on like hillbillies talking in the fishing Facebook groups that I'm a part of,
right?
They don't devastate other fish populations. Like the muskie aren't devastating the smallmouth population in the New River, no matter what some dum-dum says about the Bluestone Lake. Okay.
Okay. So
So anyway, that's my small rant about that. The state record muskie used to be 53.5 inches long and 34.6 pounds. And it was broken within the last 5 years twice. Well, the first time it was broken was in the Kanawha River. And that was 54 inches, slightly bigger, and 39.6 pounds. And in 2022, that record was smashed, recording a 55-inch muskie and 51 pounds.
nice.
So that's 11 pounds heavier than the
Yeah.
second place previous record.
This sounds like all big fish, but not big enough for
Not big
the
enough.
myth.
No. Now, there is a striper, and that's a type of bass, striped bass. And I believe that's actually like a northern kind of fish. And I want to say saltwater,
I have no idea.
or is natural to saltwater. I'm not completely sure on that. If Tasha listens to this, who runs the fishing guides through the New River, she loves striper and loves to catch striper and is going to like completely tear me up over this if I'm wrong. But
Like your sister did about episode 1.
yeah, so
As she should have. That was
For real.
deserved.
Yeah. So striper are, like I said, striped bass. The state record on that is 45 pounds and 11 ounces. And it should be noted that they stock those in the New River, and I believe they're about to stop doing that because the striper, they can't set up a population here. They can't establish themselves. They actually run upriver once a year to spawn, but the water isn't right, and so it's a false spawn. They can't actually spawn eggs and make new fish. So that's sort of sad, but
Yeah.
they stock them and they're about to stop. I wish they would actually stock like larger genes of smallmouth and largemouth like they do in some of the southern states like Texas. And I know Texas has that program, and I want to say somewhere like Oklahoma or Kansas has a program like that. But anyway, as far as bass go, the state record smallmouth was 9 pounds. That was pulled from the New River in 1977. And then the state record largemouth was 12 pounds, 4 ounces. That was pulled from the Mon River in 1994. So none of these fish, even though they're big, they're not big enough. If anything, it would have to be like a Wels catfish or the Mekong catfish. But they're in Europe and Asia. So
Did you say what the biggest catfish in West Virginia was that had been caught?
yeah, the that's
Remind
up
me.
here. I believe the blue catfish.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Yes, the blue catfish was 143 pounds.
Yeah.
And they can actually grow decently big.
Mhm.
And I've seen them like when we do floats on the New River, basically just run up in a boat and kind of flow back down and fish. Catfish will sit at the bottom of the New River and you can actually see them.
Yeah.
And I was with Tasha this one time. I was like, hey, that's a weird looking rock. That looks almost exactly like a fish. And she goes, yeah, that is a kind of weird looking rock. And then it swam off.
Right.
And we were like, that was a huge catfish then. So they do get big. And it's hard to gauge size when you're looking down through the water because of like reflection and stuff like that. But I mean, you could probably estimate one of the bigger ones that I've seen like 3 to 4 feet long, but still not truck sized, right? So myth busted. Saying it here. Is that trademark, do you think? Probably is.
Almost certainly, yeah.
Has to be. Anyway, that is our mini-sode. Maybe not so mini-sode.
Yeah, that kind of
Hopefully.
probably shorter than our other ones, but maybe not many.
Yeah.
I want to say that I'm not completely convinced there's not a giant catfish out there. I could believe that people might have seen one that just hasn't been caught because it's too big. But if there are big ones out there, then we should definitely be able to get them like on video or something.
You mean like in West Virginia?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to say for sure that it doesn't exist because it could.
I'll say this. I don't think that you'll see one in West Virginia that is big enough to get much bigger than the 143 pound record.
Yeah. Let's say myth is unlikely.
Busted. Now,
You're going to get a
I'll
letter.
say this.
Yeah.
I'll say if the catfish are going to get much bigger, you would have to have a lot warmer climate where there's, first of all, a lot more vegetation and fish can get a lot bigger.
Yeah.
First of all, the bait fish can get a lot bigger, and then therefore your catfish don't have to work as hard for every meal that they get. So
we can sum it up with, are there big catfish? Yes. Are there truck-sized man-eating catfish? No.
there are truck-sized catfish.
Not
The
here.
Mekong.
Not here.
They're not necessarily man-eating, yeah.
Good
So
episode. Very informative. Learned a lot about fish today.
we'll see. So
Good job.
anyway, that's pretty much it for our mini-sode. I hope it stayed under like 45 minutes.
We'll see. You'll be back next week with back to our original episode. Did you pick what you're doing?
Back to our regular.
It was to be decided.
Yeah. I think I'm still going to do the mass hysteria thing that we talked
That
about.
will be a good one.
So anyway,
Looking forward to it.
that's it. I hope if you have any stories about gigantic fish, like, oh, that fish I caught was that big.
Let us know.
And I didn't get a picture of it because it shook off right at the boat. Oh, no. Then let us know. Hit us up on Instagram. And if you're not following us on Instagram, then you're missing all the funnies. You'll see the photo dumps, obviously, on our Instagram and our Facebook page. Leave us a 5-star review if you enjoyed the episode. And be
Please
safe driving
share.
home.
Please share it. Hit
Please share it. Yeah. Be safe driving home. Watch out for the knot deer.
Bye.
Bye.